Welcome to PD on a Pinch, where you can find big ideas even when you're short on time. Today on PD on a Pinch, we're going to be talking about how to use exposure ladders with your students. Before we get started, if we don't know each other yet, I'm Keri. I'm a school counselor at a K-6 school on the beautiful island of Oahu. I am an author and a mom of 3, and I'm also a former gifted but undiagnosed anxious child who got an ADHD diagnosis in adulthood. So a lot of these strategies that I'll be sharing are things that I think would have been really helpful for me as an anxious kid, and they are strategies that I share with my anxious students on a daily basis. All right, along with our students, we're going to go step by step on how to use exposure ladders in school counseling. Now, we typically think of exposure therapy and CBT as the airplane analogy, right? Somebody's afraid of flying on an airplane, so we're working towards that. Obviously, we're not doing that in school counseling, but there are some situations where fear ladders can be really helpful and appropriate in our setting. What is an exposure ladder? It's just what it sounds like. It's a staircase or a ladder of small, achievable steps toward a bigger, feared or anxiety-inducing situation. We co-create it with the student. We're working together, and each step helps build tolerance and confidence. It's not a push off the cliff, it's a gentle climb. And it's a visual thing that they can actually look at and reference, or it could be interactive. Maybe you're borrowing an agility ladder from your PE coach, and you're using that to help them walk through, but it's something that they can look at and reference as they work towards their goal. So we're working with a student who has anxiety around a particular situation or activity, and we want to help them build the confidence to get there. So why do exposure ladders work? Well, they're based on a simple truth. Avoiding the feared activity or situation just makes the fear grow, but facing that fear makes it shrink. So the process gradually retrains the brain that the feared situations are actually manageable and that the student can survive them. We want to use the steps of our ladder to build confidence and to interrupt that cycle of avoidance. We might be seeing that avoidance around public speaking or reading in front of the group, or even going on a school field trip or event, or even just separating from a caregiver in the morning. So there are a lot of situations that we might be using this in the school setting. Avoidance can pop up in a lot of different ways. It could be something like, I have to go to the nurse right before a presentation, or I forgot my materials every day before that small group intervention. So these patterns are often anxiety-based, and exposure ladders give structure to facing those anxiety-inducing situations. How do we build the ladder? Well, let's look at the steps. As with any project or task, the perfect first step is to just define our goal. And in this situation, our goal is that feared situation, or the thing that's causing anxiety that the student really needs to do, like give the presentation or maybe eat in the lunchroom. So we want to make sure that we're identifying and really honing in on what is that exact feared situation using the student's language. And we want our goal to end up being something very specific and observable. So it's not just be more comfortable, it's be comfortable enough so that I can give my presentation in front of a small group of peers and my teacher. So our goal that we're starting with is actually going to be that top rung on the ladder. That's the end point. That's where we're climbing to. And once we've defined our goal, the top of the ladder, we have to go to the bottom of the ladder and start brainstorming the steps. And we're going to do that together with the student. We want to start by asking the student, what's one small step that feels kind of scary but not overwhelming? We want to break this bigger goal into 6 to 10 smaller steps that they can take, starting with something that really isn't that uncomfortable to them. So maybe it's asking a question in class about the topic, but we want to use our steps or consider them from easiest to hardest. So something that's not hard at all, and then working our way up towards that extremely feared situation, which is obviously the hardest. Considerations are really going to depend on what that top step is, that feared situation, but we want to consider the environment, the people who are around, how long it's going to take between each step on the rungs of the ladder, and so forth. After we've built our steps along the ladder, we want to consider adding some coping supports to each step. These coping supports can be people or they can be strategies. So maybe each rung of the ladder is going to be paired with a calming strategy that the student has practiced in counseling, or a self-talk phrase that they've developed on their own. So we're not throwing them in alone. We're building scaffolding. We're letting them know there are people here to support you every step along the way, and there are strategies that you have in your back pocket that you already know about that you can employ as you work your way up the ladder. For example, if one of the steps along the ladder is just practicing in a mirror for the presentation, maybe on the student's note cards, they're going to draw a little rainbow symbol to remind themselves to take a rainbow breath, or they might draw a fist, and it's going to remind them to squeeze and release their fist a couple of times if they're feeling anxious. If one of their steps is to practice giving the presentation with a friend, we're going to identify those peers who are positive supports and we're going to include them as we build the ladder. Seeing those reminders of those coping strategies and seeing the names of the people who support them right there built into that visual ladder goes a long way in reminding students that they're not in this alone and that they can rely on other people and on themselves as they work their way up the ladder. Some students might benefit from having rewards or reinforcement at each step. Not all students will need that, and the ultimate reward is reaching the goal at the top of the ladder. Now that we've identified our goal, our steps along the way, and built in coping supports, it's time to practice and reflect. So each rung of the ladder should be practiced more than once, and we're going to use scaling questions as the students practice them. It could just be something simple like rate your anxiety before and after you completed this step, or predict what your anxiety will be as you complete this step, and then rate it afterwards, and let's talk about how they compare. So we can ask questions like, what went better than you expected? We don't want students to rush through the ladder. We only want them to move up when they feel ready, and these scaling questions will really help them to be able to determine when they're ready and actually see it on paper. Say, yes, I'm actually not as anxious as I thought I would be, or I think I'm ready to go to the next step. It really empowers them to climb the ladder on their own. Let's look at a couple of examples. For a student who's feeling anxious about taking a test, our first step might be just to visit the testing room and try out the different seating options. Maybe there's a desk by a window, or maybe there's a desk close to a vent. We're going to allow the student to test out the different options to find a spot where they're actually comfortable in the room. Then, once they've found a space where they are comfortable, they can practice some of those strategies in the room, some grounding strategies, calming strategies, self-talk right there in the seat that they've identified that's comfortable for them. Once they've determined that they are comfortable in that space, they're comfortable employing those strategies in the space, then we might do some practice questions or a practice game in the testing room so they get some experience in answering questions about the material in that space. And if they need to, while they're doing the practice questions or the game, they can use those calming strategies again. Once they're comfortable with that practice question or that game that they've been playing, then our next step might be to take a practice test in that room, build in some brain breaks and some calming strategies as well. Once they feel comfortable with that practice test, then it's time to move on to our next step, which is the final goal of taking the actual test in the testing environment. For another example, maybe a student feels really anxious about eating in the lunchroom. So our first step might just be to visit the lunchroom when it's empty. Take a look around, look at the seating options again, maybe just see what's on the walls, who's there, what might be going on during the day when lunch isn't happening. Then our next step might be to visit the lunchroom when food's being prepared and practice some grounding and calming strategies so that they can notice the smells of the lunchroom, some of the sounds that are going on in there. Once they're comfortable with that, then we might practice going through the lunch line with the tray, with our ID to scan to pay for lunch, getting our silverware, our condiments, our napkins, those types of things, walking to a table and sitting down. Once that feels more comfortable, then maybe we're going to eat a snack in the lunchroom with a small group of peers that the student has identified that they're comfortable with. Try out our different seating options. Do they like sitting on the end of the bench? Do they like climbing into the middle of the bench or a chair, whatever the case may be in that particular lunchroom? Once they've had a couple of those snacks and they've started to rate their intensity as a little bit lower than it was when they started, then it's time to go in and eat in the lunchroom, right? They can use all those strategies that they've used before. They can sit with those positive peers in the seat that they identified that was comfortable. They can use that grounding strategy that they've tried before once they reach that top rung of the ladder. Exposure ladders help students build step-by-step confidence. We're showing them that fear doesn't necessarily mean danger and that they can do hard things with support, and we're there to support them every step of the way. Thanks for joining me for PD in a Pinch. If you want to keep learning more about cognitive behavioral strategies to support students with anxiety in the school setting, you can scan this QR code right here or check the links in the caption down below. I also have a book that's available for students called The Worry Warriors Guidebook and Journal for Kids, and it's full of evidence-based strategies to help kids understand and address their worries. Before you go, make sure you subscribe so you never miss a school counseling idea, and follow me on all your favorite social media platforms at Counselor Keri. I'll talk to you soon.